I came home one day and thought I'd gotten the wrong house. I pulled into my driveway and for a split second I wondered if jet lag was messing with me or maybe I'd accidentally driven into someone else's place. I looked out toward the water behind my house, and I saw it. Wooden pilings sticking up from the bay like they had always been there. It wasn't until I saw the floating platform extending out into the water so wide and confident that it hit me like a ton of bricks. That wasn't a mistake. That was my property. Right there in front of me, something that had never been there before, and I knew it wasn't supposed to be. Now, I live in a little town called Harbor's Edge, Maryland, on a narrow stretch of bay. It's one of those places where mornings smell like salt and marsh grass, where the loudest thing you hear is a heron lifting off the shallows. My backyard isn't some manicured lawn stretching out to the water. It's marsh grass mud at low tide and shallow water that creeps in and out with the rhythm of the tide. I've always liked it that way. There's no dock, no tiki bar with string lights, just the water and me. My wife Claire used to joke that we had the most boring waterfront property in the county, but she meant it lovingly. We bought the place 15 years ago because it felt untouched. I'd stand at the edge of the marsh at sunrise, coffee in hand, watching the tide roll in, knowing it was all mine. Nobody else had carved it up. Nobody had built anything out there. A year ago, the house next door sold to a guy named Brent Collier. He wore boat shoes even when he wasn't anywhere near water, and he had that tan that said, "I play golf more than I work hard." The guy was always talking about maximizing property value. He came over to introduce himself right after he moved in and said, "Good to have someone over here who appreciates waterfront." I remember smiling and saying I appreciate it by not touching it. He laughed, but I could tell he didn't really get it. For months he'd talk about building a dock. Nothing crazy, just a little pier, maybe space for 2 slips, he'd say. I'd nod and remind him as long as it stays on his side. He'd grin and say, "Of course I'm not trying to start a war." Then Claire and I went out to Arizona for a week to help our daughter move into a new apartment. While we were gone, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. No missed calls, no frantic texts from neighbors. It was all calm. But when we came back, I saw fresh tire tracks in the sand near Brent's place. And then I saw it, those pilings. They were thick timber posts hammered deep into the bay floor, and there was a floating platform wide and sitting on black plastic drums with framing already set up. It didn't look small or modest. It looked permanent. It was past the property line. And the thing is, boundaries on the water aren't obvious. There's no white line painted on the bay, no fence. But when we bought this place, I paid extra for a full survey, and I knew exactly where our boundary was. I had the maps, I'd walked the lines with the surveyor myself. I knew where the iron pins were buried, and those pilings, they were on my side. I didn't go over there and yell, "I don't do that." Instead, I went inside and grabbed the old survey from the filing cabinet. I laid it on the kitchen table and measured the distance from our property's rear corner to the water. It didn't change. The math was still the same no matter how much he thought otherwise. The next morning, I called a marine surveyor named Luis Ortega. He's calm and meticulous. "I need an updated survey," I told him. "There's construction going on that's over my property line." He let out a low whistle when I described what I'd seen. "I'll bring the GPS," he said. While I waited for the survey, I walked down to the marsh again. The crew was there, 2 guys on a flat barge, one on shore with a clipboard. The sound of the diesel engine and the pounding of more pilings made my blood pressure rise. I cupped my hands and called out, "Hey, who's supervising this job?" The man with the clipboard looked up. "You the neighbor?" "Yeah, I'm the property owner on this side." He pointed toward Brent's yard. "You'll want to talk to Mr. Collier." Brent came out a minute later, coffee in hand, like nothing was wrong. "Morning," he said. "What do you think?" I didn't smile. "I think you're over my line." "Oh, we measured it," he waved me off. "It's fine." "No, it's not," I said. "Your pilings are on my property." He took a sip of his coffee. "Your shoreline's unused, Daniel. You don't even have a dock. I'm not hurting anything." That's when I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. He didn't think it was mine because it wasn't being used. I called Luis 3 days later. He arrived with high-precision GPS equipment. We worked for hours measuring, plotting, making sure the numbers were right. And when he finished, he looked up at me. "Daniel," he said, "you were right. Not only are several pilings inside your boundary, but the structure extends beyond the bay's usual limits. Even on Brent's lot, this isn't up to code." That's when I knew. This wasn't a neighbor dispute anymore. It was something bigger. That night I couldn't sleep. It wasn't just the pilings. It was the way Brent had said it. Your shoreline's unused like that somehow meant it wasn't mine. I lay awake listening to the soft sloshing sound of the tide, thinking about how easy it is for someone to redraw your boundaries in their mind. The next morning, I laid out the new survey and the old plat on my desk. The difference was clear. Brent's floating platform wasn't just a few feet over the line, it was way past it, and the entire structure was bigger than what his permit allowed. So I went digging. I found Brent's permit application in Maryland's public database. It had been approved months ago, private residential pier, single slip. But what was in the water was far from that. It was at least 3 slips, and it wasn't anywhere near what he'd been approved for. This wasn't just a mistake. This was something else. I sat down and wrote him a letter. No emotion, no drama, just facts. I requested he stop construction and remove the encroaching structure. I mailed it certified, and 3 days later I got the signed green card back. But the crew was still out there. That's when I decided this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was defiance. I walked over to Brent's place again. This time he didn't wave me off. He just looked tired. "I got your letter," he said, like it didn't matter. "I think you're overreacting." "No," I said, "you're over the line." He shrugged. "Water moves. Marsh shifts. We're talking a couple feet." "A couple feet into my property," I said. He looked away, and I knew this wasn't just about the dock anymore. It was about power control, and whether you can just take what doesn't belong to you because it's unused. I called Karen Whitfield at the Coastal Resources Division. I told her about the encroachment, the permit violation, and the survey. The inspector came out, and after measuring, he confirmed what I already knew. The structure was out of bounds and construction had to stop. But it didn't end there. The violation was referred to environmental compliance. A few weeks later, Brent got slapped with fines and he had to remove the structure, everything, even the pilings he'd driven into my boundary. By the time the crews came to dismantle the marina, I stood there watching. The pilings came out one by one, muddy and broken, and with each one that came out, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not because of what I had done, but because I had stood my ground. Brent's insurance wouldn't cover the cost of the removal. His contractor left the job and the marina was dismantled piece by piece. And through it all, Brent's confidence started to shrink. It took weeks, but the bay slowly returned to what it was before. It wasn't about me defending a line in the water anymore. It was about boundaries, about respect. The final cost. 6 figures more than a modest dock would have ever cost. The law didn't shut it down because I complained. It shut it down because it violated permits and boundaries. I think about the conversation I had with Brent months later at a neighborhood meeting about shoreline regulations. He said, "You could have handled it differently." And I asked how. He didn't answer. The funny thing about waterfront communities is they're full of people who talk about respecting nature, preserving the bay. But when it comes to your shoreline, there's pressure to build bigger, better, more. I didn't build. I didn't need to. Sometimes doing nothing is the most powerful thing you can do. If I'd let it slide, I would have sent a message to everyone around here that boundaries are flexible if you push hard enough. And they're not. They never should be. So if you came home and found someone building on what you legally own, even if you weren't using it, what would you do? Would you let it slide to keep the peace? Or would you draw the line knowing it might cost a relationship? Because that's what it really comes down to. Not marsh grass, not water, but neighborly harmony versus standing your ground. If you've been in a situation like this, dealing with boundary disputes or neighbors overstepping their bounds, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below and let me know. Was I protecting my property, or did I escalate something that could have been handled differently? Let's talk about it.